Okay, hey everybody, Dan here. Happy Friday, I think. Depends on where you were positioned. So we got a pretty, let's just say a little bit kind of a nasty sell-off in some of the former high flyers. And the reason I say former high flyers is because I wouldn't call Broadcom a high flyer. I mean, it has been, but this is the kind of thing like this, and certainly Nvidia. I don't know. Do you guys know? Hopefully, I'm not describing you, but do you know anybody who's like in their mid 50s, maybe in their 60s, even kind of dumpy, kind of fat, not that good looking, but they were the high school quarterback and the homecoming king, and they actually married the homecoming queen. She's inside right now, taking an injection or two of Ozempic. Um, wearing the same crap that she's worn for the last 12 days in a row. In other words, these people have kind of they've kind of had their better days and they're pretty much behind them. Yet the quarterback still sits outside in the driveway on his lawn chair with his buddies, 12 pack in the ice cooler right next to him, talking about the old glory days. Okay. That's kind of the image that I have of some of these stocks. Nvidia, it's been this way for a while. And I've been nailing Nvidia for years, including saying, let's not talk about nailing it anymore. It's one of the things that actually is one of the reasons why I'm never on Kramer's show anymore, much to my eternal chagrin, because he didn't like my target on Nvidia, and that's okay. It actually blew through that target. But anyway, the bottom line is this: like you've got some of these stocks, these massive high flyers. Palantir is an awesome one. Okay, this may reach its glory days sometime in the future. But to sit around here now, if you're an investor, fine. You got years of capital gains in here. Don't sell the stock. Don't give it to Uncle Sam. He'll just fritter it away on something stupid. But if you're a trader, okay, this is not something that you should be trading. This is not something, none of this is going to do you any good right now. Nvidia is going to hit 170 before it hits 180, most likely. I could be wrong. But I'll tell you that it's going to hit 170 before it hits 190. That's for sure. So what I'm telling you is all these AI plays, these semiconductor plays, these chip plays, which by the way, have been awesome. And the semiconductor space is certainly, I guess, where you want to be. But when I look at all of these things, this really kind of smacks of a double top. It's not there yet. I wouldn't say that. Like this is, well, let me get rid of all this crap. I don't need it anymore. Like this is the one top, then you got this low here, then this is another top. And so in order to really, really, truly qualify as a double top, you'd really need to see this come down to here. Okay, so if it did that, okay, that's another 10% drop. If the SMH drops another 10%, and it certainly could, but if it drops another 10%, nobody's really going to be happy about that. So I'm not really looking for that. I'm just looking for this to pause, like sit around, fart around here at the 50-day moving average for a while. Nvidia, I don't know what it's going to do, but it's not going to do anything good. And you can be sitting there, and I know I see people tweeting about it. I hear our members. I get questions all the time. Nvidia, Nvidia, Nvidia. And if you're an Nvidian, I got to tell you, you need to just let it go. It's this the thing. You can either wait to be proven right, or you can make money now. But you can't do both on Nvidia. That's all I'll say about that. Maybe not. I may come back to it. I don't know. I'm chatty. So with Broadcom, though. So now, and this is what I really initially wanted to talk about, and I'll end with this. So Broadcom actually printed some pretty good numbers, like great revenue, good in accelerating in revenue, earnings, awesome, guidance, they guided up. The only issue was, well, there are a couple things that I could see. One is the market's no longer looking just at what the revenue is. The market's looking at, okay, well, what are your profit margins? Is this sustainable? Is it, would you say it's my term, is it good money? In other words, is the revenue coming from we'll say a renewable source, not to bring solar panels and windmills into the equation, but is it coming in a way that's just going to continue to flow for this company, or is it kind of a one-hit wonder type thing, kind of like AHA back in the day? So that's what the market kind of looks at. And also, there's another issue with respect to guidance, like stellar guidance was already priced in. And so it's not like the company reported any number or said anything that was bad. Not at all. It was all good. The question is, was there enough good to actually be translated into great, or put another way, better than we expected? And the answer there is no. And so this is my trade. This is my suggestion on this. You got to look at this. This probably 3 times average volume, almost 100,000 shares, 100 million shares versus 29, about 30 million typical shares traded during a day. So this is like 3 times average volume. This is a massive, massive sell-off and a really, really bad close right near the low, right? You can see it here. Let's see what it did after hours. More of the same. So this thing really had a bad close. It only popped up during the last half hour, probably shorts or covering or something. So this was just a really, really bad day for it. Okay, well, there's nothing we can do about it now except analyze it, except look at it and say, okay, what are we doing now? What's going to happen on Monday? And this would be my guess. My guess is this is going to close higher than 360. What would be perfect for a trade would be if the stock would actually gap down. We'll say like the stock gaps down. Today's intraday low was 355. Okay, so let's say it even gapped down to like 350 would be a dream. For a trade I'm talking about. Let's say the stock gaps down at 350, heavier than average volume. Then what do? We look for the next move to be higher. We look for the stock to come right back up. And even better, now that we're fantasizing, even better, it would look like this. Let me get this taken away. What I'm trying to draw here, I might not be able to do it on the limited software that is TC2000. What I'm trying to do is show you this. We'll go like this. We'll say, I'm deciding something. Yeah, I'll just leave it there. So what I'm saying is, what I'm looking for is the stock to gap down, maybe even trade a little bit lower, and then close higher on the day, hopefully close to the 50-day moving average. So what does this give us? It gives us another buying opportunity like we've seen a few times before. Now, if it stays below the 50-day moving average for a few days, you got to kind of write this thing off. However, seriously, best case scenario, this is for a trade. I would actually look at this as, if it happens, almost like a day trade. The market's really heavy now. This was kind of the last of the Mohicans. Everybody kind of had their hopes pinned on Broadcom to save everything else. Well, that didn't work out, guys. And so what you want to do is just look, don't engage in fantasy football here. There's no magical thinking here. This had a horrible day. Look for some kind of a rebound on Monday. The last thing you want to do is short the stock on Monday. And so seriously, if you happen to be long, like let's say, and I know a lot of people like, oh, they bought it right at the 50. They're great. Perfect buying opportunity. Awesome. If that's your trading style. If you're that guy and you don't really know what your trading style is, if the stock gaps down a little bit on Monday, don't sell it in a panic. And that happens a lot. That's why they call them shakeouts. So I want you, if you're already in, hold tight. Stock's probably going to give you some kind of rebound. If you're looking to buy, then wait for the stock to move up, wait for it to recapture the 50-day moving average. And I'll just say this, the longer this thing is, the longer this stock goes down, the better the bounce is going to be on the way up. So that's what I think about Broadcom. Don't take it personally if you people are at Nvidias or Broadcomiums or any other kind of Ians. So that's all I got for you. Have a good weekend, and I will see you on Monday.